Oh, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode, live stream, whatever we're calling it, of Pirate Radio. I am your host, who needs zero introduction. And before we get started on tonight's topic, as usual, try to support the channel. Go to diefreeco.com, get your AR accessories. I think they have AK accessories now, and use code TOXIC10. We'll save you 10% off from those fine folks up there in New Hampshire. And they got cool shit. And they send you cool stickers when you buy stuff. So, like this one. And that one. And they're good quality stickers. And we all like stickers with our stuff anyway. So, anyway, this episode is going to be something a little bit I've done before, but never in this form. I guess, for being completely honest, I just don't have a whole lot of time really to prepare the way I would like to for this show, working a full-time job and doing other things. But anyway, so instead of doing like clips and cutting things together, we're going to do the full context breakdown. Jeremy Boering, formerly of the Daily Wire, did a video for Memorial Day and said a whole bunch of things in there. Some of it was really, really nice, I guess, thanking the troops, explaining how and where Memorial Day came from, what it represents, some of the things that happened during Memorial Day that most of us don't actually do, like moment of silence at 3 p.m., flags at half staff until noon for the deceased, and then raising them up to full staff for the folks that are helping veterans. Memorial Day is for the deceased soldiers, the guys who didn't make it, the guys who gave it all, and gals. Whereas Veterans Day are for all the veterans. So there's kind of a little delineation, which is what he explains in the first minute and a half of this video. A little background on Jeremy Boering. If you're not familiar, he is the former CEO of the Daily Wire. He was ground floor of launching the Daily Wire, him and Ben Shapiro. He left for whatever reason. Not really sure why he left. Doesn't really matter why he left, but he left the Daily Wire. Seemed to be under amicable terms. Whatever. But he has now come back. He had a podcast before. I don't think he did a whole lot of episodes. I can't remember, but when he had a podcast on the Daily Wire, and then he would host the behind the backstage or the live stuff when they would watch. They get all the talent for the Daily Wire in a room, and he would be ringleader when Ben Shapiro wasn't talking. He would talk. Anyway, got to get my shot at Ben Shapiro in there. But seems to be quite the good person, good guy. I don't think he has any real nefarious actions or intent, but you don't know. I don't know the guy, so whatever. I'm taking him at face value. Never met him, obviously, but anyway, he did this episode on Memorial Day, and then he got into some different topics, and that's what I'm going to rebut. So, without further ado, we will switch over. We will produce the show, and
Last June, when the United States first started hitting Iran, podcast host and former Navy SEAL Sean Ryan posted this on X, quote, "I've fought in enough fake wars. I think I'll sit this one out." Now, I don't know Sean Ryan personally. What I do know of him is that he served his country with honor and distinction. But this statement and similar statements from other veterans turned influencers deserves real scrutiny. Because while I'm sure there's a version of cynicism about the global war on terror that's genuine, that comes from hard thinking and arrives honestly at hard conclusions, the more prevalent version sure seems to come from a kind of audience capture.
And there we have our first accusation of Sean Ryan and some others about audience capture. It is quite rich that someone who helped basically co-found the Daily Wire, which is a very right-leaning and quote-unquote, conservative media outlet, talks about audience capture. And what audience is that exactly, Jeremy? That audience is going to be like-minded veterans and people like myself who want to hear from those veterans. You know, Sean Ryan's done a lot of interviews with guys that didn't fight in the war on terror, that fought in Somalia, that fought in Panama, that were Delta, and they fought some guys. He's had Mac V. Saw guys on there, John Stryker Meyer, that's the first one comes to mind, that fought in Vietnam. And he talks to these guys about their experience and what they did. And these sometimes are, my God, he has one interview with a MARSOC Marine who I can't remember the guy's name. And that interview is something like 10 hours long. They get deep. So I'm not sure. You call out Sean Ryan on what he said. I don't know how you can sit there and say necessarily, it's not necessarily saying he's wrong, but you're going to go into an entire video here where you try to point out how he is wrong. And it's very disingenuous when you talk about audience capture, because what is exactly audience capture? Where basically you're going to get some feedback from, you're going to do an episode of something. I have a very small, very minor YouTube channel where I do this. I have a small following on X where I do this, and mainly a lot of things that I do, it's like 50-50 between the political nonsense and this stuff and gun content, shooting guns, fixing guns, modifying guns, all the stuff that you see behind me here. I collect them, I shoot them, I do any number of things with them. I have certain videos that have done very, very well. I have certain videos that no one apparently has ever fucking seen. I am not going to be audience captured, if you will, by certain videos. I don't find it interesting. I don't find it fun. To me, all of this is fun. I do things that I find interesting. There are any number of gun tubers out there who are obviously, you know, placating to an audience, and perhaps they have a financial reason to do so. When you're going to talk about a guy like Sean Ryan, that he's you know, audience captured. Well, here's the thing. He has a variety of people on his podcast, from people you've never heard of. Like I said, John Stryker Meyer was Mac V. Sog. He wasn't allowed to talk about it for 20 years. After that 20 years, at some point he put out a book. And how many people actually know, unless you're like a guy like me who's into that whole world and is very interested in what some of those guys did? Like, could Jeremy Boering tell me who John Stryker Meyer is? Could he tell me about Roberts Ridge? Could he tell me about any number of guys that Sean Ryan has had on there? But no, he'll talk about audience capture. So, anyway, it's just, I'll let him keep speaking.
That version of cynicism is performative, and it comes from a media landscape that's told influential people in 1,000 ways, quiet and loud, that calling America's wars fake is what gets the likes and makes the money.
Again, you're saying, you're really calling out some people. That's what gets the likes and gets the money. And I just realized that there's a dog on the couch with him who could give a shit. I'm also going to point out that the couch he's sitting on has the British flag on it. If you're wondering what all the stripes there are, that's the Union Jack. Okay? I don't like that. But yeah, we're going to talk about what gets the clicks, and gets the likes. Yeah, combine clicks and likes into, I haven't even been drinking yet. This is soda water. God's sake, with nothing else in it other than air. But bro, you helped found a website, a media, you know, entity that exists for clicks and likes. And your little buddy there, Ben Shapiro, his whole shtick was to get clicks and likes. First with Facebook, then with the YouTube Shorts and Instagram, of going to a college and talking to some idiot who's 20 years old, who doesn't know anything, and then, quote unquote, owning the libs. And then, boom, that was the whole thing. So it's a lot of pot calling kettle black.
See, it's become lucrative to undermine the legitimacy of the American story, to rewrite our history, to villainize our leaders, to cast doubt on our founding ideals and our role in the world and our alliances and our sense of ourselves as a moral force. America's military actions have been reframed as wrong-headed or just plain wrong. And it isn't only the recent conflicts either. Plenty of Americans, even American Christians, believe the Civil War was wrongly decided, or that the Revolutionary War itself was somehow unjust and immoral. It's hard to...
Okay, so now we're going to go back to the Revolutionary War. And one of the themes you're going to notice throughout this entire video, and I think I'll get through the entire video here, is he makes an accusation and never gives any evidence of it. And if he does start to give any evidence, it's kind of just brushed off, and it's some sort of fringe thing. Like the American Revolution was some sort of unjust. Who is saying that? Give me a name of someone who says that. What serious person truly believes that? Are we talking about like the leftist activist of like a, that crazy bitch that wrote the 1619 Project? Is that what we're talking about? Because those people didn't fight in anything. They're crazed leftists that you yourself have lambasted, have castigated, who have insulted most likely, and that's not who we're talking about, is it? But you're going to use this whole fringe thing, and it's very rich coming from a former Daily Wire guy, which apparently now is with PragerU. Now looking at the description here, it's same thing with PragerU, Daily Wire, actual true like conservatives, hard right folks who believe that abortion is murder and that it should be outlawed. Their same argument in the abortion argument is they will talk about, the other side will argue from the fringe. Oh, well, what about rape and incest? That is the fringe argument, and you're correct. That is a very, very, very like minuscule part of what constitutes abortions. Now, you can say that I'm anti all abortions. It doesn't matter how the child was conceived. It is a child that is conceived. It is, God's miracle. This is life. It doesn't matter how it became life. It is life. If you're on that side, that's fine. I can totally get that. I'm not there yet. The rape and incest thing, but it's a fringe argument. So now he's going to launch into his own fringe argument. He's going to do the fringe thing. He's going to bring up some random, he never really names a person outside of like Sean Ryan. And he talks about these fringe things and never gives any actual evidence. Now, if you want to talk about the minutia of the Civil War, we can do that. If we want to talk about how Robert E. Lee was right or wrong in the side that he chose, we can get into those fine details. That's fine. But to sit there and go, there's people that think the Civil War was wrongly decided. And you know what? They have a fucking point. But that doesn't have anything to do with the individual soldiers. That as a policy matter, if you will, the Civil War, you can point to any number of things in which the South was correct. And then you can point to any number of things in which the North was correct. We can talk about the lead up to it. We can talk about the lead up to it as far as like the rhetoric coming from President Abraham Lincoln and even candidate Lincoln. We can talk about all the deep, dirty things. We can talk about how Lincoln became basically a de facto dictator by suspending the writ of habeas corpus throughout the war, how many people were in prison, jailed, detained, deported, shot, killed, executed, whatever. Both sides of this whole thing. We can talk about any number of things that you want to talk about. There's a whole bunch of nuance, which will never come into play in this entire video. You can talk about any number of things from the Civil War and the way it happened, but apparently from the Jeremy Boering perspective, it was only about slavery, so therefore, if you're on the North, you were the good guy, even though you went and did some very atrocious things, and if you're on the South, you are inherently evil, akin to a Nazi, apparently. But let's go.
To imagine anything more destructive for a nation than a widespread belief that it's a force for ill in the world, and always has been.
No one is saying that. Again, you allude to this thing where someone said, and you're lining it up with Sean Ryan, saying that America is a force for ill in the world. If Sean Ryan really believed that, he would leave. He didn't say, I can't believe I ever served, F this whole thing, screw this country, I hate it, I can't believe this. All he said was, I've done enough of the fake wars, I'm going to sit this one out. And he went downrange. I don't know exactly what he did, but I do know he's a former Navy SEAL. He was a SEAL at the time. He did some CIA contract work. The dude was in the shit. Could have been killed, could have been shot, maimed, anything else. But
it weakens our national immune system. It demoralizes us. It makes us vulnerable to attacks, both ideological and physical. This movement may seem organic. It isn't. Foreign influence operations amplify and exploit it constantly because weakening American confidence in itself is in the strategic interest of every hostile power on Earth.
Well, that's weird. Foreign influence, huh? Maybe he'll talk a little more about what he's talking about.
2026 study from researchers at Yale and the University of Amsterdam found that China launders its positions through TikTok influencers and bots, and that the longer Americans scroll, the more favorable they become to the Chinese communist regime. In 2023, TikTok was instrumental in making Osama bin Laden's manifesto go viral, leading thousands of unwitting Americans to believe that 9/11 was the fault of Israel.
Now, let's talk about that. So, let's do the whole history here. Let's talk about TikTok. So, 2023, China still owns TikTok at the time, or someone associated with China still owns TikTok at the time. They go and they have, I guess, whoever, it goes viral. Osama bin Laden's declaration of war on the West. And people start reading it. The interesting thing about it is like trying to get that document post like 9/11, like a year later, 6 months later, you couldn't find it. You couldn't get it. It was really hard to find. His declaration of war on the United States, or on the West, but especially the United States. And what he's referring to is Osama bin Laden talks about the shelling of the Palestinians by Israeli forces. And because the United States backs Israel, sells them weapons, backs them up, it is a backstop as the big brother, doesn't allow them to be, attacked and destroyed, which is fine. And because the United States, we here are a democracy or a republic, constitutional republic technically, and we're allowed to directly elect our leaders. Therefore, the American people are not innocent and are on the war menu, if you will. I don't agree with him, but hey, that's what he said. So
foreign actors do most of this work, but cynical political operators here at home manage to do the rest. The combined effect is a country that's being talked in real time into believing that it isn't good. But perhaps no one has been damaged more directly by all of this than the veterans and the families of the fallen soldiers from the global war on terror. The logic is inescapable once you accept the premise. If the wars were foolish, then you were a fool to volunteer. If the wars were wrong, then you were wrong to fight. And if the wars were evil, which is where some people have actually arrived, then the things that you did in the conduct of those wars were evil too. Killing in the service of evil is about the most evil thing a person can do.
Again, we're going to conflate all of these things together. We're never going to actually make the case of this, that, nuances out the window. So if I go, like I've done numerous times, and I criticize the Iraq war, therefore I am by proxy criticizing the guys and gals who were sent to Iraq, which is untrue. It's the same logic that a guy like him will use where I say, I'm not really a big fan of Israel's wars and the wars that they're launching. Good luck to them. I just don't want to pay for it. Therefore, somehow I hate all Jewish people in his mind. It's the same kind of empty logic there. But you could sit there and say, hey, Jeremy, so if you think Iran is bad and they're an Islamic regime, does that mean you hate all Muslims, right? So all the Muslims in the United States should have to go. Like they're all just jihadis in waiting, right? They just haven't picked a victim yet. Is that kind of where we're at? Now, how far does this go? Do you look at somewhere like, I don't know, let's say, I don't know, let's pick South Africa where you have black roving gangs killing white farmers. Are we going to say that all blacks are now just farmer killers in waiting. Like, how far does this go exactly? So when we criticize something that we see as being wrong and we don't like, and that means that we have to, now we're talking ill of those same people, like that doesn't hold water at all. Like, if I criticize a soldier, I criticize a soldier. If I call someone a baby killer, which I've never done and never will, that doesn't make me, that would make me criticizing the soldiers. Me criticizing my government for the horrific things that they do and the bad decisions they make does not mean I'm criticizing the soldier. It's just such a shitty argument.
So when a man who held a rifle in Fallujah or Kandahar, or the father or mother of a man who died in those battles, is now being told by many of the loudest voices in the culture that the war was fake and the cause invented, what are they supposed to do with that? What are they supposed to do with what they carried home? The downstream consequences of that process for a generation of American veterans is shame. We're rewriting the history of the global war on terror in real time, and that rewrite isn't honest. It's built on political convenience and cultural fashion, and it's being amplified by forces most people don't bother to think about when they log on and scroll past a tweet. When I was a kid growing up in West Texas in the late 80s.
So now we're going to blame foreign influence. So like, I don't have my own, agency. I'm not allowed to talk about these things. I'm not allowed to come up with my own opinions. I'm not allowed to take Jeremy's opinion. I'm not allowed to take Ben Shapiro's opinion, Dennis Prager's opinion, Dave Smith's opinion, Scott Horton's opinion, Tucker Carlson's opinion, my father's opinion, my friend's opinion. I'm not allowed to take all of these opinions unless they agree with yours or the mainstream narrative of the global war on terror or Vietnam or 9/11 or anything. It's just so bad.
80s and early 90s, I was aware of something happening in the culture. It was a slow, halting rehabilitation. Vietnam veterans, many of them drafted, many of them who had no choice about going to war, had been treated terribly when they came home, spat upon, in some cases, called baby killers, shunned by the very culture they'd served. And at a certain point, the country looked in the mirror and decided that it had done
that behavior was wrong, is what I meant.
Something shameful, because it had. And so slowly, imperfectly, we tried to make it right. These men served, they sacrificed, they deserved our respect. That reckoning was right, and I watched it happen. During the global war on terror, the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq that followed 9/11, America did something it had failed to do in Vietnam. It separated the war from the warrior. Support for the troops was genuine. We had cultural commitment, yellow ribbons, crowds in airports applauding soldiers in uniform, a near universal consensus that whatever you thought of the policy behind the war, the men and women who fought it deserved dignity and honor. That was good. It was right.
Exactly. That's our position. That's the anti-war position. That's the, go to war when you need to go to war position. This is not... Let's look at it the reverse. Okay, let's say let's just do the inverse here. So let's use his argument that the people who are against the global war on terror or Iraq say that it was perpetuated by a bunch of evil people inside Washington, D.C. who didn't really mean well, who just wanted to harm the country, spin us into oblivion, what have you. And therefore, if we call them evil, we call our regime, our government at the time, evil. Therefore, by proxy, we call the soldiers evil. Okay, well, what does it mean, Jeremy, when we call the soldiers heroic, the best of us, men and women doing the things I've never signed up to do, could not possibly ever, I could not do the things that they do. Whether they're talking about your regular, front of the line infantry, we're talking about Delta, we're talking about the SEALs. Name the branch, the pilots, whatever. So when we say those are the best of us, the best of our generation, the best of our country, how come it doesn't go backwards? How come the obverse is not true? It's not true because I'm able to hold two thoughts in my head at the same time. Like two things can be true at the same time. These guys always want to talk about World War II, which he's about to do here not too long from now. They always want to talk about World War II. Well, let's talk about World War II. Let's talk about Well, let's just talk about the powers at play. We don't even have to get into like Germany at the time and the National Socialist Party and the frontline soldiers and those things and the nuances between those two. Let's just talk about the powers at play here. If we talk about the Allies versus the Axis, so once it's full on, we're in the war. 1942 is like our first full year. Let's talk about this. We allied with Joseph Stalin, who we knew was a murderous communist bastard. He had killed millions of his own people. He had starved millions of his own people. This is coming out of the Holodomor, where in the neighborhood of 5 to 15 million people, depending on who you talk to, but millions of people were basically starved to death through a direct policy of food confiscation and farm confiscation. We allied with that guy. I would assume, Jeremy being the intelligent man that he is, that he would say Joseph Stalin was an evil man. Okay, we allied with Joseph Stalin against Germany, Japan, Italy, and a few other minor players in the whole deal. Does that make us evil, Jeremy? Or is there some nuance there of like lesser evils, bigger forces, two fronts, things of that nature? I'm always curious how those guys would ever answer that question, but they'll never debate. They'll never actually engage in a one-on-one, honest debate against someone who can actually argue these points, but I digress.
But something's changed. Support for the Iraq War peaked at roughly 72% in the days after the invasion in March of 2003.
Peaked at 72% in the days after, in which we were kicking ass. Remember that.
But by November of 2005, that support had fallen below 40%, and it never recovered.
I wonder why it never recovered. 2005, remember that. In 2005, it fell and never recovered.
More recent polling shows that majorities of Americans, including, and this is the part that breaks my heart, including the majority of veterans, now describe the wars as a mistake.
Who's right, Jeremy? The guy talking on the British couch that cost probably $10,000, or the guys and gals who went and fought it, who got deployed, who went there, who saw it and went, what are we doing here? This doesn't make sense. Jeremy, we were both alive at the same time during the Iraq War. Neither of us went. Both of us were too afraid to go or whatever. Neither of us signed up. And I remember those times, and I remember the articles of the time and the reporting at the time and all of this and how the morale was just hanging. It was bad. It was bad not only in Iraq, but it was bad in Afghanistan. Remember this, though. Never recovered. 2005.
And the rot has gone further than that. There's polling last year that found nearly 1 in 3 Gen Z voters described Osama bin Laden's views as a force for good. There is no serious...
20%. Okay, so here's the thing. That's a bad statistic. But there's 3 lies that exist. Lies, damn lies, and statistics. Okay? So I don't know what the statistic is. I don't know where he got this. But, maybe make a better argument, dog.
Serious argument against going to war in Afghanistan. Any president of either party would have done it.
He is correct. Any president of either party would have went to war in Afghanistan. Correct.
Al-Qaeda had planned and executed the largest terror attack on American soil in our nation's history from Afghan territory under the direct protection of the Taliban regime.
Not true. Not true. Okay, the Taliban were in charge. The Taliban were no fans of Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda was protected by the United States and the Central Intelligence Agency. It was a creation of the United States and the Central Intelligence Agency. If you want to talk about bin Ladenite jihadis, we were funding, training, and equipping them to go and fight in Chechnya against at that time, the Russian Federation. The breakaway Russian Republic of Chechnya, we were funding those guys, training those guys, equipping those guys to go in there and fight the Ruskies in the post-Soviet world in the 90s and the early 2000s. We funded Al-Qaeda and the bin Ladenites to go into Bosnia and Serbia and fight in those wars as well. Okay, so this idea that Al-Qaeda just randomly pops up, hates the United States, and wants to kill us. It's also the reason that there was such a not a what would you say, such a blind eye to the terror attack of 9/11 in the United States. The reason that that was able to happen. Now, this is not conspiracy theory. This is not like, oh, there was demolitions and this and that, or someone brought them here. But the reason that these guys were so like loosely followed and loosely watched is because they were on the payroll. They were doing our dirty work over there. That's why they were able to operate with impunity, with their switch house, with their call house in, I think, Yemen, which we had bugged. They were able to communicate across the globe, and we didn't do anything about it. We were just watching it. Everyone can talk about, oh, it was because the FBI couldn't communicate with the CIA and the NSA, and they wouldn't communicate in between each other. The reason they wouldn't communicate is because the CIA had this group that they were funding, equipping, and training to fight the Russians on all of these fronts. Mind you, you sit there and you say, well, why would they be equipping them to fight in Chechnya against the Russians? The Soviet Union fell. Well, this is the quote-unquote mujahideen that we had propped up in Afghanistan to fight against the Soviets from 79 to 1988 in the Soviet-Afghan War. Okay? We helped foment some coups, some insurrections there, and then we propped up this group. We funded them. We funded them not only with weapons and training and know-how, but we also gave them Stinger missiles so they could take down the Soviet helicopters at the time and really turn that tide and really inflict some casualties. Okay? That is where Al-Qaeda came from, and that is why they were able to pull off what they pulled off on 9/11, was because we thought they were on our side, because they were on our payroll.
The Taliban was given the opportunity to surrender Osama bin Laden to face American justice. They refused.
Not true. They were given the opportunity to surrender Osama bin Laden. They gave us the opportunity to take Osama bin Laden out years before when Bill Clinton was president, and we didn't do it. But they have this code where they cannot actually hand over, but also, in face of that, George W. Bush gave a 24-hour timetable for then the leader of the Taliban at the time to hand over bin Laden, and then I think it was 10 hours into it, 14 hours into it, Bush said, F this, we're going to war anyway.
When someone murders...
That sounds like revisionist history, by the way, there, Jeremy Boering.
3,000 of your citizens in a single morning, you go to war. You smash things. You avenge the dead. You assert your national will to deter future attacks. Afghanistan wasn't a war of choice. Afghanistan was justice, the minimum justice for what had been done to us.
I agree wholeheartedly. You had to go to Afghanistan. Yep.
And Afghanistan was political reality, too, because any American leader who didn't pursue American justice after the mass murder of our people wouldn't have been an American leader for long.
Also true. I will tell you, being a 17-year-old male, senior in high school, that everyone was really mad. We didn't know who did it on the day of or even the day after, but the second we knew somebody was going to get dead somewhere.
The campaign in Afghanistan was swift and successful. The Taliban fell. Al-Qaeda's infrastructure was destroyed. Bin Laden fled to Pakistan, where he was eventually killed in Abbottabad by American special operators in May of 2011.
That's an interesting thing. So bin Laden fled. Well, bin Laden was allowed to flee out of Tora Bora. We could have taken him out. We smashed the Taliban. Who's in charge of Afghanistan right now, Jeremy? Okay. Again, this whole thing is going to come around to bite him in his own ass, but apparently he thinks you're too stupid, or maybe he's too stupid. It's like a stupid or liar game. Maybe he thinks you're too stupid to put this thing all the way together, because there's going to be some recurring groups in this whole thing.
Which is not to say there's nothing to criticize about Operation Enduring Freedom. America's decision to fight the war may have been a fait accompli as soon as the first plane hit the first tower. It was. But the decision to hold Afghanistan, to attempt to civilize it, that was a matter of political policy. Maybe you don't agree with that policy. Fair enough. That doesn't mean that America's interests weren't implicated.
So I like that he uses that He uses his words very well, and he uses them to. It's propaganda, in essence, what it is. Um, he uses the term civilize instead of what the actual term was, nation build, which is a Woodrow Wilson policy from 100 years prior, roughly 100 years prior. Talking about nation building, which again, I would assume that Jeremy Boering would be not a fan of Woodrow Wilson, one of the worst presidents we ever had, but that was his whole plan, is nation building. And so there you go. You're talking about nation building. You're not talking about American interests or some sort of civilization or bringing them up to code of the modern world or anything like that. You're talking about nation building. And we should not be engaged in nation building. What do I care about the nation of whatever? I don't. I don't care about nation building. And nation building, what it does is it takes all of our resources, our treasure, our money, and it gives it to someone else. And I'm not a fan of that. So here we go. We'll continue on.
Obviously were. Leaving Afghanistan after toppling the Taliban would have seen the country immediately revert to its former state as a haven for al-Qaeda. It would have demonstrated to our enemies that we didn't have the political will to see our actions through, that they could kill our citizens and still survive if they just waited us out long enough.
Okay, so let's assume he's right there, which he's not right, which, by the way, where are we at right now? So we would have just created this haven if we had just left the Taliban in charge. Well, that's interesting. So you just mentioned, Jeremy, that bin Laden escaped to Pakistan. He probably didn't escape alone. He probably had some associates with him, a.k.a. al-Qaeda. So what are we doing about Pakistan? Did we ever wage war on Pakistan? Did we ever hold their feet to the fire? No. Why not? Well, they have nuclear weapons. Is that why, Jeremy? So it's not about right or wrong. It's not about imposing American will. It's more about what exactly? Isn't our interest in Pakistan for them to not have nuclear weapons, or India for that matter? Isn't our interest to smash al-Qaeda and the Taliban? See, again, you're conflating two different things, that the Taliban even gave a damn about the United States. Al-Qaeda cared about the United States and the Western world. That's why they came after us. The Taliban didn't care. The Taliban was engaged in war against the Northern Alliance. No one, apparently everyone forgets that. What business of ours was the Taliban? This whole idea that they were joined at the hip with al-Qaeda is going to come back up here. And it's going to come back up here with Iraq.
And so we stayed. And our staying bore fruit. Al-Qaeda was unable to effectuate an attack on American soil for 2 decades.
You can't actually say that. Al-Qaeda was unable to effectuate an attack on the United States. Okay, well, let's use that same logic in regards to modern-day Iran. Iran has never attacked the United States. Yet, for some reason, we have to take out Iran. That's interesting. That's interesting. So if your delineation here, if your casus belli is an attack on the United States, then what are we doing in Iran?
Our special operators became the most lethal advanced fighting force the world has ever seen. When you say today, why was taking Maduro in Venezuela so easy? Well, you can thank the proving ground that was Operation Enduring Freedom. And American forces had a semi-permanent presence in one of the most dangerous parts of the world from which to assert our interests in Pakistan and Iran. It was good for Afghanistan too, of course, though that alone wouldn't have been enough to justify the invasion. Slowly, and sometimes impossibly slowly, parts of Afghanistan began to modernize. For 20 years, girls in Kabul went to school instead of living lives of virtual slavery. The power of American influence to bring transformational change in the Middle East, the same way it had brought transformational change in the Far East a generation earlier, was gradually coming into focus. None of this was free. The effort in Afghanistan cost real treasure and real blood. The total American death toll across the entire 20-year conflict was approximately 2,500 service members, every single one of them of infinite value. But compared to past military conflicts, the price was relatively low. Compare it to Vietnam, for example, where 58,000 Americans lost their lives in a war that lasted roughly half as long, with a draft military rather than an all-volunteer force. By the final years before the withdrawal from Afghanistan, the United States was holding the entire country with a force of roughly
We're going to skip ahead here.
2,500 troops. As though our grandfathers should have looked at the cost of World War II in its third year and said it treats duration of conflict as the betrayed. The mission wasn't a failure. The withdrawal was a failure. And how did we arrive at that failure? Well, in large part because of a single, toxic, and historically illiterate term, a rhetorical fig leaf for giving up. Forever war. It's an unserious term for an unserious people.
It's an unserious term. Okay, let's hear this.
Treats duration of conflict as the disqualifying factor, as though the length of a commitment is evidence of its folly rather than evidence that it's hard. As though our grandfathers should have looked at the cost of World War II in its third year and said, we've been at this long enough, time to go home.
Again, everything is World War II to these absolute fools. Everything's World War II. Not everything is World War II, Jeremy. Not everything is the Holocaust. Not everything is so clear-cut as World War II, which is not that clear-cut. But we had a clear-cut mission. Smash the Nazis, smash Germany, smash Imperial Japan. That's what we did. And by the way, with Japan, in regards to Japan, we did decide we've been at this too long, and we don't want to spend any more blood on this, so we're going to show them the sun twice. Okay? Look at these fireworks, Japan. So that is part of the calculus in World War II. But, we don't ever talk about, if you want to talk about nation, okay, if you want to talk about the combat operations in Afghanistan were basically over by December. From October to December, it was pretty much done. It was over. The war was basically done. If you want to compare that to World War II wasn't done in May of 1945 or August of 1945. There were still hostilities taking place after those dates. May of 45 was the European theater, and August of 45 was the Pacific theater, Japan. There were still hostilities taking place in Europe after that fact, okay? And then if you want to say, okay, well, it just ended in 1945. Well, it didn't end in 1945. We still have bases in Germany. Is it over? Yeah, now it's over. But this continued on and on and on and on and on and on. And it only kind of made sense then because then in World War II, post-World War II, we were the dominant power. We have now asserted ourselves as a superpower, not only militarily, but economically. And we were benefiting as a nation on the post-war Europe rebuilding project. And we made cajillions of dollars off of it. We had a robust economy off of that. This idea that you're going to invest tens of billions of dollars in Afghanistan and it's going to become what? Fucking Paris? What are you even talking about?
The history of Europe is a story of perpetual, seasonal, generational war. The 30 Years' War, the 100 Years' War, the Wars of the Roses. These aren't aberrations. They were the norm. War is the historical baseline of human civilization.
Do you know why that was the norm, Jeremy? Because you couldn't move fast. You were in pitched battles. You didn't have airplanes and bombs and tracked vehicles and armored personnel carriers and all of these things. That's why those wars took so long, because they kept fighting here and there and here and there and there and here, and they had to move and do this, and it took months, if weeks and months, to move and do this and do that. As if the idea that because it took 100 years to settle some stupid petty squabble between two Europors translates into we should spend the next 100 years in Afghanistan? Do you hear yourself? The Greeks fought 3 Peloponnesian Wars. Where did that get them? Nowhere. They spent a lot of treasure and a lot of people doing it. And then they had to fight the Persians because they were engaged in the Peloponnesian, many of the Peloponnesian. Like, what are we talking about here? Okay, Jeremy, what is the timeline? You'll never lay out the timeline. When is the job done? See, this is the thing that none of these guys will ever talk about. They'll never talk about, well, okay, what is the end goal? What's the timeline? What is the end point here? No, instead, they'll talk about perpetually having people there.
The relative peace of the last 80 years, that's the aberration. And that aberration was purchased and maintained by American power and American blood. America has maintained a military presence in Germany since 1945, in Japan since 1945, in South Korea since 1953. We've had troops in Okinawa for 80 years. We've had troops in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba for 123 years. Nobody demands we bring those troops home because everyone understands their presence in those countries is the price of stability.
I demand we bring those troops home. I don't know what a bunch of Marines in Okinawa, what stability they're bringing at this point. I don't understand what a bunch of troops in Germany and what stability they're bringing at this point. We have NATO, and Germany is a first world country. They're kind of okay. And what stability is Guantanamo Bay bringing to Cuba? They had a goddamn communist revolution in that 150 years there, pal chief. I don't know what you're even talking about. It's just so like off the rails here. Now we'll have them talk about Iraq.
Bush didn't do it either. Conspiracy theories can be entertaining. The promise of Gnostic secret knowledge can be thrilling. A belief in secret, powerful forces unfolding history can be comforting in its own strange way. But while conspiracies happen all the time, conspiracy theories are lunacy. They make you sick when you pursue them, and they make your nation sick when you believe them. Now, Operation Iraqi Freedom is more complicated. It was, in some very real sense, a war of choice, though less a
100% a war of choice.
War of choice than its critics like to pretend. By 2003, the United States had been in a de facto state of low-grade conflict with Saddam Hussein's Iraq for over a decade.
Oh, this gets
Since
good.
the Gulf War ended in 1991, American and British aircraft had been enforcing no-fly zones over northern and southern Iraq. We did so because Iraq slaughtered tens of thousands of its Kurdish citizens after the American withdrawal from Operation Desert Storm.
Who let them do that, Jeremy? Who let them fly the helicopters to put down the rebellion? Who encouraged the Kurds to rebel against Saddam, telling them, hey, don't worry about it. They won't be able to do anything from the air. We got you, dog. And the second they did it, we allowed them to fly helicopters, and they slaughtered those Kurds. Who did that, Jeremy? We didn't enforce the no-fly zone until after the Kurds were slaughtered, did we?
In that decade of patrolling the skies over Iraq, Iraqi forces fired on coalition aircraft more than 2,000 times.
I don't know if that stat is correct, but I can tell you this as someone who was alive at the time. We used to just, anytime Bill Clinton had a bad day politically, Iraq got fucked up. I'll just tell you that.
It wasn't a country at peace with the United States. It was a country that had never accepted the terms of its own defeat.
Here we go.
After 9/11, smashing a terrorist network in the mountains of Afghanistan just wasn't enough. The message to the regimes that had spent 2 decades funding and sheltering and excusing the kind of men who eventually flew planes into our buildings had to be unambiguous. We were no longer willing to distinguish between the terror they sponsored and the terror they merely tolerated. We were willing to crush industrialized militaries in industrialized states just as surely as we were willing to crush third world terrorists in Afghanistan. Iraq was intended to reassert American deterrence beyond what the war in Afghanistan was capable of achieving. Every major Western intelligence service, American, British, French, German, Israeli, all of them assessed that Saddam either had or was actively developing weapons of mass destruction. It wasn't just some lie invented by the Bush White House. It was the judgment of professional intelligence services around the world, shaped by Saddam's own decades-long obstruction of UN weapons inspectors and his prior use of chemical weapons against the Kurds and against Iran.
Where did he get the chemical weapons, Jeremy, that he used against the Kurds in Iran? Was it from us? Was it part of the Iran-Iraq war in which we equipped, sold, and blessed Saddam Hussein to go into Iran to fight against the Iranian regime, the 1979 regime that took over, and the Ayatollahs and the mullahs? So where did he get those chemical weapons from there, Jeremy? By the way, he got the chemical weapons like basically a part A and B, and you have to mix them on site, or mix them once they get there and then use them. Where did he get those, Jeremy? Care to tell us? I would think that if you knew so much about the weapons of mass destruction that allegedly Iraq had, and allegedly all of the intelligence told us that he had, I'm also dubious about where the bulk of that intelligence came from. I think you would also know, if you knew all of this about weapons of mass destruction, that you would have known that during the first Gulf War down in southern Iraq, that we did stumble upon a nuclear facility that was underground. This would kind of somewhat back up your argument that he was developing weapons in secret, but you don't even know that because you haven't done any of the homework, you haven't done any of the reading, you haven't heard any of the other people talk about this who could possibly potentially back you up, because you just go, oh, they said bad things and they hate soldiers, and so I can't listen or read them. Idiot.
The assumption that he might have such weapons again wasn't paranoia, it was based on evidence and history. And it was against the backdrop of watching 19 men kill 3,000 Americans with box cutters.
You're equating two things that have nothing to do with each other. The 19 hijackers that took over those planes and flew them into targets here in America have nothing to do with Saddam Hussein. Zero. Just like, what's his name? Ramzi Youssef, who led the plot to try to blow up the World Trade Centers in 1993, or the truck bomb parked in the basement, had nothing to do with Iraqi intelligence either, even though a lot of neocons and a lot of neocon writers and a lot of neocon papers wanted to try to make that connection so we could launch a war in Iraq. They were trying to make that connection in the mid to late 90s, mind you.
The catastrophic scenario of nuclear materials in the wrong hands, of a dirty bomb in an American city, was a real operational concern, not just a talking point.
It's a talking point, and it's a talking point again, but now it's just about Iran. Can you imagine if they had a dirty bomb? You imagine what they would do? Iran can't have nuclear weapons. It's the same talking points, guys. It's the same ones. Tired, old, ridiculous, just unvetted, uneducated, nonsensical propaganda.
Now, the intelligence turned out to be catastrophically wrong. But wrong, even catastrophically wrong, is not the same thing as fabricated.
Okay, so now you're just talking about intent. The end result is the same. This is your words, Jeremy. Catastrophically wrong intelligence. Now, let's ask ourselves, how do you get it so catastrophically wrong when you're talking about the French, the Dutch, the Israelis, the Americans, the British? All of the Western intelligence agencies got it catastrophically wrong, and they were all catastrophically wrong about the same thing. Gee, I wonder where the intelligence might have originated from that was catastrophically wrong. Interesting. I'm going to say it was fabricated. I'm going to say it was a lie. Use the direct words, Mr. Boering. Say lie. Don't say fabricated. It would do you better if you said lie. But that's what it is. It was a complete and utter lie. Colin Powell lied at the UN. They talked about yellow cake from Nigeria or some shit. It was such a ridiculous claim that Dave Chappelle on Chappelle's show, they mocked it. He had yellow cake. I think it was Donnell Rawlings' character had yellow cake on a napkin. And they're like, oh, don't drop that. And he's like, don't worry. This napkin protects it. Don't worry. This yellow cake. He had yellow cake. It was such an absurd claim.
And placing American military power in Afghanistan and Iraq simultaneously on Iran's eastern and western borders at the exact same time was a significant strategic pressure on the Iranian regime, which was the single most destabilizing force in the Middle East as it is today, and was the primary state sponsor of anti-American terrorism in the region then, as it is today.
I would like to point out, again, he doesn't do any of the reading, has not done any of the reading. He's not going to do any of the reading or the listening or the research. The Iranians provided intelligence for us in Afghanistan. I'll just throw that out there.
There's a reason Iran poured resources into undermining the American project and murdering American servicemen in Iraq from the day we arrived. They understood what was at stake.
That is not true. The Iranians did not start murdering troops the day we arrived. If you want to equate every Shiite with Iran, it still is a fabrication. That is still a lie. That is not true. Our route through southern Iraq, that's why we went through southern Iraq, is where the Shiites are, and some of the Iranian, fighters. Most of those guys fought Iran. A lot of them share blood with Iran. But the thing is like Iran is Shiite. They're Shia Muslim. Southern Iraq is Shia Muslim. They're Shiite. We were going to overthrow the Sunni minority government, the murderous bastard who had been holding down the Shiites. They basically allowed us to pass and go do it. And then once we did it, then it became a different calculus.
Even when many Americans apparently didn't. If we hadn't given those strategic locations up, by the way, we would have considerably more leverage to pressure Iran over the Strait of Hormuz today.
We still have troops in Iraq.
Now,
we also have troops in Kuwait. We also have troops and bases in UAE, Qatar, Saudi Arabia. But if we had them in Iraq, which we still do, it would be so much better. It'd just be a lot of dead soldiers, dog.
Not whitewash history. Iraq wasn't Denmark with bad intelligence. Saddam Hussein's Iraq was one of the most violent regimes in the Middle East. Torture.
Aren't they all? Like, now we're going to make the moral argument. Remove it. He ends up blaming all on Obama, by the way. Obama, who got us into Syria. Now he's going to turn on Trump.
Moral standing to use it. Plus, it was good politics. But the real question is, why did Republicans turn on the war? Moral standing to use it. To fix it. The left turned on Iraq early, and their reasons were at least partially intellectually honest. There's always been a strain of left liberal thinking that's genuinely suspicious of military force and that treats American power as inherently imperialist and the United States as possessing no special moral standing to use it. Plus, it was good politics. But the real question is, why did Republicans turn on the war? The answer to that is one of the most peculiar political phenomenons in American history.
He gets this completely
wrong. See, the party that championed these conflicts, the party that stood with the troops, that waved those yellow ribbons, abandoned not just the strategy, but the basic moral legitimacy of the entire affair because of one man. To win the Republican primary in 2016, Donald Trump had to get past Jeb Bush. Trump's strategy was cynical but highly effective: to directly attack the war started by Jeb's brother, George Bush, to attack it forcefully and relentlessly, to attack it in ways that no major Republican figure had ever done in a presidential primary. At a February 2016 debate in South Carolina, of all places, Trump said this, quote, "They lied. They said there were weapons of mass destruction. There were none, and they knew there were none." See, Trump understood something many Republican elites didn't. Millions of Americans no longer knew how to interpret the sacrifices of the post-9/11 era. The war had become emotionally unresolved.
Let me point out right here, before it gets too far gone, when Trump said that in South Carolina in 2016, the room booed him. The pundits, the Republican strategists and pundits back in the Fox News and what have you said, well, it's over for Trump. That's it. What made that turn was not only the American people, but at that point, the support from veterans, from Afghanistan to the Jihad itself in Iraq, that was the group that went hard for Trump. So, if you're going to try to equate me as a civilian, always a civilian, talking about the ills of the Iraq war and the miscalculations and nonsense that we got into in Afghanistan post Al-Qaeda, as some sort of indictment of the veterans, which it's not, then the like obverse of that has to be what, true or false, that when the veterans go, yeah, no, he's right, that was stupid, we should have never went there, the guys that actually were in the sand and in the shit and smelling all the bullshit and seeing all the stuff, when they go, yeah, no, he's right, and that's our guy, maybe they're right, Jeremy, but you sitting there on your British flag leather sofa talking about how they're wrong and trying to equate our criticisms of the administration as being some sort of indictment of them is just, again, it holds no water, and it's just so fucking dishonest. You're a piece of shit.
Trump didn't resolve that wound. He weaponized it, and he won. Donald Trump became president. Jeb Bush went home.
To never be heard from again.
To his credit, Trump is governed as a foreign policy realist. He destroyed ISIS. He killed Qasem Soleimani.
Hey, Jeremy, how did he destroy ISIS? Where did ISIS come from? Let's start there. Again, our creation. Obama created ISIS to head west into Syria. They decided to go east from western Iraq, and they took over many, many towns, many, many cities, and created the caliphate. If you guys all think back, which apparently Jeremy can't think back this far, we remember seeing the convoys of brand new Toyota trucks with machine guns and the black ISIS flags heading into Mosul and different places in Iraq, in Iraqi cities, and sacking them. And we were like, why aren't the forces fighting back? Because they were joining ISIS, because it's all a bunch of Sunnis. And so you had that. And where did they get the Toyotas? Where do you get brand new Toyotas in a war-torn Iraq? Gee, I wonder. Did they go down to the dealership and buy them? Well, here's the other thing. How did he take them out? You can't take out an ISIS from the air when they're in cities. So, again, if he had done any of the homework, if he had looked any further into this, we partnered with Shia Muslim militias, some of them complete Iranian militias, and we had them go and take back those cities with some special forces on the ground and with our air support. So I guess Iran's not all bad.
Removed Nicolas Maduro from Venezuela, and when the moment came, he authorized strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities that previous presidents had only dreamed of. The Trump foreign policy is that of
that previous presidents were smart enough not to get into the quagmire that is Iran now, with the Strait of Hormuz that is shut down because they knew they couldn't reopen it back up without a full-scale war and a ground invasion. They were smart enough to at least tell Tel Aviv that, hey, we'll do Syria covertly. The American people are not behind a full-scale invasion into Syria, which is what Obama wanted to do. But the American people said, and so the Republicans were like, well, I'm going to lose my job if I back this thing. So they're like, yeah, we're not doing that. And so he just funded a covert war, which is, again, where ISIS came from. If I can't send my own soldiers, well, I'm going to put boots on the ground, and I'm going to take these guys, I'm going to equip them, I'm going to give them Toyotas, and I'm going to have them go in and do it. And they were like, yeah, no, dog, we're going east. And then you created the caliphate, and you didn't know what to do with it because you're like, are they gonna play ball like at some point or what? And then no, they didn't play ball, and Trump came in and did take him out, but used a whole bunch of Iranian and Shiite forces to do it. Well, what the fuck?
A man who believes that American interests are real, that hostile regimes are genuinely hostile, that American military force, when properly applied, can advance our security. Still, the campaign rhetoric he used had lasting consequences, namely that the average Republican voter today holds the position that Donald Trump ran on in 2015, which is the position of Barack Obama in 2007.
Again, you're equating these. Look, the American people don't want to go to war, dog. When did you become a fucking neocon? When did you become, like, it's always so crazy that the guys that have never served, never been in the shit, is not a veteran of any sort, let alone a combat veteran, they are so quick to throw everybody into war. I don't get it. It just drives me fucking crazy. I've had enough of this asshole. I don't even want to listen to him anymore. Like, then sign your kids up, dog, if you want them to go fight. Why, are your kids in the Marine Corps? Your kids in the Army? Are they kicking down doors? Are they doing all the different things? No, they're not. And you would never have them do that because you're just a fucking coward too, man. It's just make somebody else's kid do it. Why don't you just run for Congress at this point? Fucking piece of shit. All right, I'm a beer deep. I've had enough of this guy. Fact of the matter is this: is I don't want to go to war with Iran. I don't want to go to war with anyone. If my country is going to go to war, I want it to be because it's an existential threat or it's a direct threat. I don't want this like, well, what if, or this or that, or blah, blah, blah. And it's like, I don't know, man. Let them get the thing and do the thing. Like, we talk about if Iran gets a nuclear weapon, it's going to be, Israel's fucking nuke, bro. Well, they used to say the same thing about North Korea. Like, North Korea gets a nuclear weapon, their Seoul's going to be on fire. Well, that hasn't happened. It's been over a decade, if not 2 decades at this point, that they've had nuclear weapons up in Pyongyang. This is crazy talk to me. Pakistan's a bunch of fucking nut jobs, and it's like, well, they got a nuclear weapon. It's like, none of this holds water. It's all just some sort of like spurious reasoning that, and again, I've pointed this out numerous times. Like, if you're going to tell me that the Iranian regime is some sort of like Islamo-fascist, hell-bent on destruction, and some sort of death cult, blah, 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 and they're just frothing at the mouth to kill all Jews. Well, okay, well, then maybe don't send 2 Jewish fellas to go negotiate with them. I don't know. Seems like they would be like, yeah, no, we don't, the whole thing there, whatever. So it's all just bullshit and lies and just nonsensical. But anyway, everybody, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Join us on the live stream every Friday night at 7:30 Central Time, or as we like to call it, correct standard time. Go to Die Free Co. Spend some money. Use code Toxic10. That'll give you 10% off, and I'll put a little in the coffers of this beloved channel here that you all know and love. And until next time, everybody, have fun, stay safe, and drink more. Peace.